Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be venturing into the realm of the paranormal with 10 truly twisted and creepy tales. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification for brand new stories every single night. I'd also like to thank our guest narrator for today who will be joining us for part of the video, Miss Creepy Tales. A link to her channel is found in the description and at the end of the video, and as always, if you like her work, please show her some love and check out her channel. But for now, it's time to get comfortable, grab your bedsheets, and let the darkness take control. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts where the term Minutemen was coined during the Revolutionary War, so there's definitely a lot of history there. My mum and I moved into an apartment complex when I was 3, and we're both really excited to have our own little space. I'm 35 now, and can remember all of this so vividly like it was yesterday. I remember having problems sleeping immediately after we moved in. I developed night terrors and would wake up in the middle of the night at the exact same time, 3 a.m., experiencing utter terror. I was so young that I couldn't rationalize what was going on and would scream for my mother to come get me and take me to her room. Every night, at the same time this happened, it'd be like I was woken up out of a sound sleep because of sheer terror and just had to get out of that room. And this continued for the next 2 years. At this point I'm 5. This one particular night I was laying in bed and woke up at 3 a.m. So I'm just laying there, but this time I'm not screaming for my mother. I'm laying there waiting, as if something is going to happen. I can sense it, when all of a sudden, in the pure silence of the night, I heard the doorknob turn and the door to my room open, and something just glided extremely slowly across the carpet. Something in my gut told me not to look. I knew if I looked, whatever I saw looking back at me would ruin me forever, so I just laid there quietly, staring at the wall while avoiding looking at the door. All of a sudden, the door slams shut, and I lay there in fear, but eventually fall asleep after rocking myself to sleep. When I woke up that morning, I immediately asked my mother if she went to check on me last night, and she said no because she had been asleep herself. The look of terror on my face must have been one for the books, because someone or something definitely opened my door last night. I was awake. I know I was. I heard the door open and physically felt someone standing there looking at me. If it wasn't my mum, then who the hell was it? It was just the two of us living there, so I tried to forget this experience and move on with my life. Now, my mum loved having fish tanks, all the varieties of fish, since we weren't allowed to have any other pets where we lived. The fish would just keep dying. I know fish die, and it could be a total coincidence, but my mum knew how to take care of them, and it was just odd how frequently it was happening. We came home one day and all of them were dead. All of them. My mum just shrugged and said she had no idea what happened and chalked it off to bacteria or something in the water. That isn't what I think. I went to bed that night and woke up at 3 a.m. I groggily looked over to my closet, which was directly across from my bed, and saw through the darkness a huge black mass or shadow hovering over the closet. This thing was massive, and was the blackest black I've ever seen to this day. I was paralyzed with fear and screamed for my mother, who rushed to see what was wrong, and to my horror she saw it too. She hurriedly turned the light on and the black mass was still hovering over the closet. Looking back as an adult now, I know how terrified she must have been. She didn't want me to scare, and I commend her for this. She just got me in my bed, pulled the covers up covering us both, and held me close until we both finally fell asleep. To this day I have no idea what we saw that night, or what was actually happening there. I don't think whatever it was had good intentions for us, and we ultimately moved not long after. It frightens me to think that something was actually watching me on those sleepless nights and just preying on my innocence. Unfortunately, my mum isn't here to validate this story anymore, but I did ask her about 10 years ago, and she definitely remembered it, but could not explain it. I could tell she was uncomfortable talking about it. I was hoping she said she didn't remember, so it could be chalked off to my young, wild imagination. But her confirming that these things actually happened still send chills to my core to this day.
I'm not sure if I'd call these premonitions, but I don't know what else to call them. I feel like I have a weird connection with something. Maybe someone? I don't know. I'll give you a few examples and maybe you guys can tell me what you think. I woke up one night in a panic and frantically called my mom because something just didn't feel right. It felt like something was choking me and something inside me told me to check on her. So I called and she was okay, but I still felt something tight around my neck. She woke up her friend who lived in the house connected above hers and told her what happened. While they were checking the house, they got to her friend's brother's room. They knocked and knocked, but no answer, and the door was locked. At this point, I'm telling my mom that I really can't breathe and something isn't right and they need to break down the door. They do, and then find her brother who had just kicked the chair out from under himself in order to hang himself. They got to him just in time and he survived. I've had little things like this happen throughout the years that I just genuinely can't explain. Smaller examples. As a young child, my mom was going to the store and I was supposed to go. I cried and absolutely refused to get in the car. She went without me and was T-boned on the side of the car that my car seat was located. As a preteen, I was camping with my grandparents and we would go four-wheeling in our Jeep all the time. I never missed an opportunity. I was getting ready to get in the car and something inside me said no, so I stayed. They rolled their Jeep for the first time ever, and the whole back section I would have been sitting in was completely crushed in. I remember being at an apartment and could vividly explain to my mom what it looked and smelled like, who was there, where the apartment was, etc. I have never been there because the woman died before I was born. I had only been there while my mom was pregnant with me. Sitting and doing tarot readings with my friend, I felt the presence of the death card. So out of 15 cards, I picked the one that kept calling out to me, and it was in fact the death card. I was doing a tarot reading for another friend. She wasn't next to me, and she didn't know I was doing it. I just wanted to give her some answers, so I was going to call her once the reading was over. I was shuffling the cards and ended up zoning out and had no idea how long I was shuffling for. When I came to, the friend I was doing the reading for called me and said that she just randomly fell asleep in the middle of the day, which she never does. She said it felt like all of her energy had been drained from her and something told her to call me. I had gotten out of the shower one morning and had to sit down because I had pain in my leg that I couldn't breathe, and I got extremely lightheaded and my brain felt cold. Eventually it passed, but I remember being on the phone and telling my boyfriend I felt weird. The next day, I got a call from a friend saying that one of our friends had a blood clot in her leg that traveled up and caused her brain to go without oxygen. It happened the day prior in the morning, around the time that I felt the leg pain. What do you guys think of this? And what would this be called? It's kind of scary, but something that I want to look into. I just don't know what to look at or for.
This started 2 nights ago. I'm hoping someone can give me advice on what's going on. I have nyctophobia, though outside at night doesn't bother me, like the inside of a dark house or room due to childhood trauma. So on one side of the room I have white Christmas lights dimmed down for a bit of light at night. Luckily it doesn't bother my fiancé. He could sleep upside down in a hurricane. So 2 nights ago I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the bathroom. I couldn't get back to sleep after, as I have bad insomnia, and was just laying in bed bored, debating on just staying up all night, but was pretty much just staring at the ceiling and chilling, waiting to get tired again. All of a sudden, it was like every sense I had yelled danger. The hair on my body stood up, goosebumps all over, and I was overwhelmed with fear. I can't exactly describe the feeling, but have you ever been put in a dangerous situation? Maybe you'll relate to it. This is where things get weird and confusing. There was a figure in the doorway, except I couldn't see it clearly. It's a little hard to explain. So my senses were telling me, hey, there's something there, but my eyes couldn't really see it very well. I could follow it with my eyes, I could sense it, but I couldn't exactly see it. It's hard to explain. Now, whatever this thing is, it wasn't like a solid shadow, but it wasn't like a human in shape as far as I can tell. It was sort of like a mist or smoke, not very tall, kind of hard-shaped, as if someone had a sheet over themselves standing there, that kind of shape. Well, it went from the doorway to the other side of the room at the end of the bed. It didn't walk, it more teleported. It jumped from place to place. Meanwhile, every part of me is telling me to run and that it's dangerous. Then I see it go from the end of the bed to my side of the bed, and at this point I sit up, and my senses are going nuts. I can, and also cannot see, whatever is there as it moves to the end of my bed directly in front of me. My instincts are saying danger, and every part of me is telling me to move now. I didn't, because as I said, I could see it but couldn't at the same time. So going by what my eyes see, I thought maybe I'm just kind of overreacting. A few seconds later, it lurches at me, and the best way I can describe it is that it jumped onto me or into me. I couldn't yell, I tried. I was shoved back on the bed, and the feeling was like being hit with static electricity. It was covering my entire body. I managed to throw my arms out, smacking my fiancé and grabbing his chest, basically grabbed onto him for dear life, and he jumps up confused and half asleep. He sees me scared out of my mind and the thing fades. I couldn't talk for a while and couldn't move and explain to him what just happened, and he hugged me until I was able to fall asleep. Last night I had a similar thing happen, but this time I tried to really focus on whatever it was with my eyes, because once the feeling came over me, I knew it was something I couldn't really do anything about. This time I focused and it went to the top left corner of the bedroom, and it was more shadowy this time. It darkened that corner of the room/ceiling, which isn't too far from the end of my side of the bed. I sat up ready for something to happen, and it again jumped on me. I managed to grab my fiancé, who was already awake. I still scared the hell out of him, but he didn't see anything and I was alert and fully awake, but wasn't talking. And the electric weird feeling in my body lasted a while before fading this time. But it didn't move like the night before. It was basically at the doorway. Corner of the ceiling, then bam, right onto me. It happened so quickly. Was it just trying to figure out what to do or observing me before jumping me? I'm not sure. I tried to sage weakly at the least. Now I've had experiences, all kinds of paranormal stuff happened to me while growing up in a haunted house. I believe in ghosts and all that, and I've been told by a few people that due to the things that have happened and continue to happen, there's a chance I'm possessed, or at the very least have something negative attached to me, which wouldn't surprise me at all. I've been experiencing nightmares and stuff like this over years. So not knowing what to do, I think I'm going to try and have my dog look after me. Let me tell you a bit about him, in fact. Our dog is usually crated at night, in the winter because the bedroom is the warmest of the house. He has a big, fluffy foam bed and his own blankets, and I worry if he gets too cold in the living room at night. He's a 60-pound German short-haired pointer who is a total bed hog and loves to literally push you off the bed. My fiancé is a pretty big guy, so it gets a bit crowded with our dog on the bed with us. Now my dog's crate is against the wall and faces the end of the bed, so we can always see him. The second night that the thing in my bedroom jumped into me, it first was in the corner of the room on the ceiling, which happened to be directly above my dog's crate. He was locked in his crate that night, as he was the night before. After sharing on Reddit, my fear got the best of me, and I wanted the comfort of my dog next to me for the night. We were just going to deal with the overcrowded bed, and the first night we let him on the bed, he fell asleep between us. I woke up with a bad feeling and could sense something was watching me, but I didn't have the same experience as the previous nights. I knew something was there, but it wasn't moving around and didn't jump at me, so I tried to ignore it the best I could. Our dog decided to get off the bed and go into his crate. I think he was a bit annoyed at the crowded bed, that's my guess anyway, and he was able to go in and out of his crate freely. Nothing eventful happened, and I eventually fell back asleep. Now we come to what happened last night, and last night was a lot different than the previous. So I'm thinking because nothing crazy happened when my dog was able to go from our bed to his crate, that maybe whatever this thing is doesn't like my dog. I have no idea, but it was something for me to try again. So we decided our dog would be sleeping with us, and we would deal with the crowded bed once more. I mean, if I can get some sleep and not worry about whatever this thing is, then I don't care about crowding. Well, I woke up in the middle of the night. It wasn't before long that I felt something like the previous nights. Total fear. The urge to run. Goosebumps, my hair standing on end, the whole 9 yards. Our dog is in between us and alert. He's sitting up, and there is this invisible, non-invisible misty form thing. This time it isn't moving. It's just going around the bed, still kind of vanishing and appearing, and not moving smoothly. My dog was looking at it, so I was happy that he saw it because that means I'm not losing my mind. But at the same time, I'm extra scared because I have to accept the fact that my dog is seeing something. So this thing is moving around the bed, and it starts coming to my side little by little, and I'm just pulling the blankets over my head thinking maybe it will go away. I'm lying on my side facing the wall, and my dog is behind me, between me and my fiancé, who is dead asleep by the way. I turn my head around to peek out to see what my dog is doing, and he was looking towards me. I turn my head back still under the blanket. My senses are yelling danger. Part of me was saying don't look at it because who knows what could happen. I don't know what this thing was jumping on me again. Right in front of my face was that form that had been stalking me, and I guess I could almost say attacking me. Needless to say, I was beyond scared and ducked my head back under the blanket. I felt that static feeling, but it wasn't like before, and not as strong as when it jumped onto me, and it knocked me back. It was different somehow. It wasn't harsh when it jumped, almost making me feel like I was electrocuted. My instincts were screaming danger, and the urge to run was overwhelming, but nothing insane happened. So I decided to just stay under my blanket, and I could feel my dog moving on the bed, but I knew whatever it was still there, and still watching. I could sense it there clear as day. I stayed up a good while, but stayed hidden under the blanket and eventually fell back asleep, and woke up numerous times throughout the night, but didn't have another experience with that form or thing. The one thing I came to realize this morning is our dog didn't leave the bed at all last night. He stayed with us on the bed all night, and that's when my fiancé got up to let him out of the bathroom this morning, and he didn't get off the bed, and it took both of our encouragement to have him leave my side. What could this thing be? It makes me wonder if it was worried about our dog, and that's why it didn't jump on me. When it jumped on me before, our dog was crated. The night before last, it was just watching me, and my dog was on the bed and free to go into his crate, which at some point he did. But last night, it was like this form stalked me very close, didn't jump at me, and just circled around our bed watching. My dog was able to see it, so it didn't leave my side. So what do you guys think? Yesterday, we got some devastatingly bad news. It could be coincidence though, I suppose. Is this a spirit? A demon? How can it be it was nervous or scared of my dog? It kind of seemed like it was worried and stayed at a distance, and then last night it decided to get closer to see how the dog would react. Or maybe it's wishful thinking, I'm guessing. Could it have been a creature that can just camouflage itself? Something demonic? A spirit? What do you think? I would seriously like some advice, as I just want it to go away.
A pattern has emerged and I've taken notice. The seed was planted for me about 3 years ago in a conversation with my then supervisor when they told me about a shared encounter with a group of people deep in a seemingly riveting discussion they could not hear. Many of them held clipboards, and one of them was wearing a lab coat. Summary: the common threads tend to be, although this list is not comprehensive or absolute, human apparitions seated at a table discussing something, whether audible or not, that all present apparitions and entities, but not witnesses, are enthralled with. Frequently, these discussions have an extremely scholarly or scientific setting and theme, involving clipboards, pens, sometimes diagrams and lab coats, and other professional attire. Those who report to have seen this apparition sometimes say that the furniture and people involved phase through their ordinary surroundings, the actual room the reporting person is standing in, as though projected. In many cases, the victim cannot hear anything that they're saying, with the manifestation being totally visual and not auditory. The first encounter was given to me orally in June of 2017, when my then supervisor, Michael, told me that he and 2 others had encountered while surveying the inside of a building they planned to remodel, a room that was dimly lit by a light bulb hung precariously from the ceiling. Inside was a circular table with 6 people seated around it. None of the witnesses reported terror, fear, or being unsettled in any way. Most of them claimed confusion, and one claimed surprise. I did eventually interview each of the 3 witnesses. This encounter was purely visual, and none of the witnesses reported being able to hear any type of discussion, even if they all reported seeing the figures' mouths moving as though they were speaking, as well as body language indicative of a lively discussion. The clothing of the figures was apparently business casual, and a handful of them held writing utensils such as pens and pencils. I begin with this encounter primarily to highlight the differences between it and the next encounter, namely in the specificity and actions of the apparitions, as well as the setting and location. The second encounter was given to me in a voicemail in November of 2018 by a friend of a friend named Cooper. I have transcribed it to the best of my ability. There wasn't anything too difficult to understand in it. I will not release the recording. Cooper declined for her recording to be released publicly, and I have to respect that, though she did give consent for a transcription to be made available. So, here it is. Good evening, Vivid Instance. I hope this is your number. George said that it was. Anyway, he told me that you're like super busy, so I guess it'll be more convenient for the both of us if I just tell you over voicemail. I was almost 16 and I was with my dad. We'd been camping in Utah for a handful of days and were on our way back toward civilization. We stopped to refuel by the side of the trail and we stayed a little longer than we planned. Being 4 days into a camping trip, you know how your legs get. I walked off across a stream to pee, and after, when I was walking back toward my dad, I thought I heard some people talking to my right. It was sort of behind a thicket and almost a quarter-mile off trail, so I thought it was weird for there to be people there. I kinda kicked my way through the thicket and saw 3 people, 2 women and a man standing there, but I could see right through them, and they never touched anything besides each other when they seemed like they were making an important point. They were walking all around, kinda pacing around one another and talking loudly. I don't speak French, but I knew they were speaking it. You know how you can kinda identify a language without speaking it fully? Yeah. Anyways, they were speaking French, almost aggressively, toward one another. It was a really intense conversation. They were all wearing white or gray lab coats, and two of them, both of the women, wore glasses. This went on for a while, and they didn't seem to notice me, or if they did, they didn't care that I could see them. This was the relevant portion of Cooper's voicemail. The differences are clear. Where the articulations of the first encounter are in the setting and the visuals, the articulation of the second encounter is in the physical presence of the apparitions, and in what they are saying and how they are saying it. If Cooper spoke French, it's fair to say we would have a good idea of what they were talking about. Whether or not she or anyone would really want to know is, I imagine, a subject of lively debate. The third encounter was posted to subreddit Paranormal Encounters on October 15, 2020. The fourth encounter is a comment of that encounter posted by u/Tara Nicholas. Both encounters are somewhat more vague and involve indoor encounters happening to children. The fifth encounter is similar to the third and fourth encounters and was given to me digitally. I was at least 5 or 7 and my parents put me to bed. I woke up at 12 a.m. and I heard a noise from downstairs, thinking it was my parents. I go down to see what it was, and what I saw I can never forget. Pale white faces sitting around a table, just talking, one of them looking straight at me. Then they disappeared. This encounter adds little value on its own, but adds to the pattern well enough to be included. The sixth, final, and most fascinating encounter in my opinion was given to me by a friend, Jordan, via email. I'm going to give bits and pieces of the email with supplemental text for context and to assist the flow of the email while still leaving out portions that I feel need to be absent from a public post. I know there's a lot of vagueness in this one, but the meat of the story is worth reading. She began by giving me the context of the encounter. And it was really, really cold. Wisconsin cold. There were a lot of snow on the ground when I got there. I was afraid it was too cold for the RFID card reader to let me in. Luckily, I got in anyway. At about 11:30 p.m., there was no one else present in the facility. She put her things away in her room and changed out of her cold weather gear. Then she made her way to the kitchen to cook something before she went to bed. Without getting into the details, Jordan had a long day to this point. She denied feeling sleepy or even sleep deprived at the time of the encounter. She was muscle tired though. I took my cup of noodles and a fork and meant to walk back to my room where I could watch something and eat until I was ready to sleep. But on my way there, I heard something from the conference room. I think you've seen it before. It's big, with a wall that's pretty much all glass and one really long table. I thought I heard some rumbling conversations. It was a mix of men and women, all of them speaking in English, but I couldn't understand it. As I got closer, I caught a woman saying clearly, "But that's exactly the point." Jordan told me that when she entered the room, she saw them all, wearing official-looking clothing, many of them with stacks of papers, scribbling notes. She told me that she crouched in the corner and watched them for a long time before one of them pointed her out and they all immediately disappeared. Her visual description of the scene follows. There must have been somewhere between 15 and 20 people, about half and half men and women. I could see things that were real, like the tables and chairs, the snow falling outside, right through them, but I couldn't see one of the figures through another one of them. Most of the men wore lab coats, while most of the women wore either suits or were in uniform, like military personnel. Not the ceremonial military stuff, but the stuff you'd see someone wearing on base. There were a lot of papers scattered around, but I never got close enough to see what was written on the pages. Jordan gave me a list of things that she remembers the apparition saying. This list appears in no particular order. It will never get us far enough. What did you think was going to happen when you show it to someone? I don't know, Mason, but it's got to hold, or the entire structure will collapse. Did you really think steel would do the trick? What do you know about engineering? The pressure will be way too much. The entire system will shut down. Maybe Lovecraft was right about all of this. How do we even know if we can get to them? Hey, do you see her? I don't present theories or speculate at the specific nature of all of this. I just collect knowledge and present it to people who might care and notice. As always, I love PMs for their private nature, but public comments are helpful to the community, so use your best judgment.
The following is a true story that happened, but have no conventional way of explaining it. When I was 4 years old, my family lived in military housing in Winnipeg in the early 70s. I had an older brother, 6 at the time, and a younger brother who would have been 1 year old. Our house was a bungalow with a fairly conventional layout. Living room, kitchen, dining room, and one end of a rectangular structure and bedrooms and a bathroom connected to the hallway at the other end. One day I was sitting in the hallway where I would see my parents in the kitchen and could also look down the halls towards the door to the bedroom. No one was down the hall other than my 1-year-old brother, who I think was sleeping in his room. I was looking down the hall when I saw something impossible. There were 2 bedroom doorways on the left side of the hall. What I saw came out of the door on the left closet to me, about 8 to 10 feet away. As I watched, a skeletal arm slowly emerged into the hallway horizontally at my eye level until the elbow was almost showing, but not quite, and then slowly retreated into the exact same fashion into the room. I remember that the bones looked very real. I know now that they were the color of real bones and were clearly not any kind of plastic replica. The arm bones seemed to have been the size of an adult male's. I knew for certain that we didn't have anything that resembled these bones at all in the house. I also knew for certain that my older brother was not in the area of the house. I could see my parents in the kitchen, and it was unlike them to play such a scary prank on a 4-year-old. And I don't know if I can explain it, but it was clear, by the smooth and steady movement of the arm, that it wasn't something being held by someone. It looked as if it were attached to the owner. My impression was that the arm's owner was aware of me and was deliberately revealing itself to me in a non-threatening manner. Despite my age, I knew that what I had seen was just extraordinary. I noted that it was the middle of the day, and I was sitting wide awake, and of that I'm positive. There simply was no explanation. I wasn't terrified as one would think. It just simply happened and was done. I had zero interest in going down and looking into that room to see what was there, though perhaps the apparition was an invitation to do so. I didn't tell my parents, don't ask me why, but you know they wouldn't have believed me. Nothing like this has ever happened to me since this event, and there didn't seem to be any other strange occurrences in the house. A couple of years ago I finally thought to ask my parents about the house in Winnipeg. They said they hadn't noticed anything strange there, but the previous owner had died while in military service overseas. So there it is. Me and my only experience that I can say with 100% certainty, and will go to my grave believing that it was an authentic paranormal event.
3 months ago, in the early hours of the morning, I was having some trouble sleeping. I assumed I needed to adjust my sleeping position, but I ended up tossing and turning right to left and left to right for another 5 to 10 minutes. Eventually, I went back to my original position and decided to just give up trying and sleep in discomfort. After laying back down, I felt what seemed to be an evil presence, and as soon as it started, I began to lose the ability to move every part of my body. Despite what was going on, I had a strong urge to say someone's name. At this time, I was already having a panic attack after realizing I was having sleep paralysis, and I didn't really know what to do but to calm myself down. The problems in my case, the more I tried to calm myself down, the stronger the urge got. And I was running out of time until whatever that thing is got me. So I quietly, yet desperately yelled out, "Jesus!" What happened next scares me to this day. I couldn't speak, let alone breathe, for the next minute as I turned on my other side and stayed there as I heard two thumps, one on my hanging shoe rack and the other on the floor. I didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night, and then thought about what had just happened. Once I was done, I decided to investigate the situation after getting some sleep. The next morning at 6:17 a.m., I searched my room for any clues or hints that I can piece together so I may get a glimpse as to what really went down. I then came to the following theories in hopes of playing it down. Number 1. Someone hid in my room the whole time and just stumbled around on accident, looking for a way to escape. This theory got debunked because I would have heard a few other things in my room, and I found nobody inside. Number 2. I could have imagined it all, as if it was a nightmare. While it made sense on hearing the thumps and the paralysis I had, I got rid of it because I was kept awake for the duration of the experience, as well as why I needed to yell out Jesus' name. And number 3, my shoes fell off the rack. It would make sense on the thump on the floor, but it doesn't explain away the first thump. Also, out requires a certain amount of force to knock just one shoe off the rack. After thinking it over some more, putting the pieces, I had finally solved the puzzle. A demon came into my room in order to haunt my mind with my weaknesses, but as soon as I said the name of Jesus, it tried to escape after seeing an angel God sent for me, bumped into my closet door in the process, fell on the floor, thought, "Screw you," and left. Meanwhile, from the angel's point of view, he scared the demon off and watched over me for the rest of the night as I slept.
I'm 14 and my brother 18. I was on my PS4 with my good friend playing on one of our games, when suddenly out of nowhere I hear this loud scratching and shaking coming from my bed on the other side of the room. I look over and see my mini football goals that are folded up moving side to side violently, as if someone was trying to throw them around. Both my brother and I saw it with our own two eyes. It happened for a good 10 seconds, just randomly shaking violently, and didn't calm down one bit and kept moving at the same speed, shaking constantly. The goals didn't just slow down and stop. No, it was extremely fast and then it stopped after about 10 seconds completely. So after my mini mental panic attack, I started shouting at my brother who had just witnessed the same thing. "What is that? How is it happening?" And he faces me and starts shouting the same thing I said back. We live near train tracks and they are decently far away, but they're very active. But this hasn't happened in the past 7 years. We usually hear the trains driving since it's decently loud. And imagine, if a freight train or something exceptional had come by, surely the goalposts wouldn't have been the only thing that had shaken, right? We then decided to experiment and try to simulate what had happened, so we pushed the goals to side, and it only took 1 second to show that it was very slow and not violent. And let me tell you, at this point I was considering smashing every mirror in the house, since our mirrors are second-hand and they seemed very old. We've had past experiences where we saw tall, skinny men in the darkest, dark corners of the hallway at night, slowly and carefully bend the door handle and close our door quietly. I cried after seeing this because the arm frightened me more than you know. I'd never witnessed anything so creepy. After this little incident, we checked the house and didn't find any intruders or anything. So there's no way they could have exited the house. This only means that it must have been some entity doing this. I'm positive that it's the same entity that is messing with us and that did the little goalpost fiasco. We were seriously spooked. I'm moving to another country soon, so I'm not that bothered. I just hope I don't have any more repeat encounters until then.
In the summer of 1989, just before I turned 6 years old, my family and I lived in a small duplex at the end of a cul-de-sac. We'd lived there since I was about 2 years old. Our duplex was set back a ways and there was a long driveway between our door and the street. My mom was close friends with a family that lived directly across the street. Their single-family house had a small front yard with a gate that opened up to a walkway that led you to the porch steps. Up the steps was a nice porch that ran the length of the front of the house and, of course, the front door. They were an older couple whose youngest daughter, who we'll call Irene, still lived with them, and they had custody of their young granddaughter due to some issues that their oldest daughter had with drugs. Irene was a year older than my sister, and their granddaughter was just a little younger than me. It was nice to have someone closer to my age to play with. My sister is 4.5 years older than me and was too cool to hang out with a little kid. She was happy to have an older friend to hang out with too. We were always going over to each other's houses, and they were more like extended family than friends. So when the older couple asked my mom to keep an eye on their house while they went out dancing, of course, she obliged. Irene was babysitting the granddaughter, as she had done several times before, and they had just wanted someone else that they trusted to keep an eye out. They had 3 big aggressive dogs out back that only liked the older couple and would attack anyone else, so there wasn't much worry of intruders. It was a good neighborhood, and back then, neighbors had keys to each other's houses, even though most rarely locked their doors. Every 20 or so minutes, my mom would call their house to just check in. It was the usual, "Are you two okay? Do you need anything? I'll check back in a little while." And then she'd hang up. Now, before we proceed with the story, I should probably mention that their house was always very dark and had the feeling that the darkness wasn't just a lack of lighting, but more like a complete saturation of the shadows within it. It was always cold, even in the peak of summer in New Mexico. I know, it sounds weird, but I'm sure that some, or most of you can relate. Seems we've all had an experience with a place like that at some point. After some time went by, my mom picked up the phone and dialed their number. It just rang and rang. Now, call waiting had just become a thing earlier that year, but not everyone had it, and none of us on that little dead-end street did. So my mom grew concerned, but she hung up and decided to wait a few minutes and try again. Maybe they were using the bathroom, or eating and couldn't get to the phone on time. As soon as she set the phone on the receiver, it rang. She jumped because she hadn't expected that. She lifted it and answered, "Hello?" Static came from the other line, and it was loud. I remember her yanking the phone from her ear and shouting into it, "Hello? Irene, is that you?" The static seemed to get louder, then more quiet, and then back to loud. I remember hearing the faint sounds of a child crying and a girl shouting back, but the static was too loud. My mom shouted into the receiver, still holding it about a foot from her face, "I'm going to call you right back. There's a bad connection." And she put down the phone onto the receiver. I was standing a few feet away watching this. as she picked it up to redial. Something caught my eye from out of our living room window. The window faced the driveway that we shared with a few other duplexes and the street, and ultimately the front of their house. I walked about 3 steps over to that window and looked across the street. And now remember, I'm almost 6 years old, so things don't immediately sink in for me at this age as being odd or out of the ordinary. I'm just seeing what I'm seeing. As I'm watching, the lights in the windows of the 2 front rooms are blinking wildly on and off. The porch light was too. My mom was on her 3rd redial and putting her shoes on when I heard Irene answer in a frantic state. I couldn't hear her exact words, but she was hysterical, and my mom just shouted over her to say that she was going over there. She hung up and told me to lock the door after her. She shouted to my sister, who was listening to cassettes back in our room, that she would be right back. She got the keys of their house and I followed her to the door where I promptly locked it after she stepped out. I went back to the window and watched her run across the driveway, across the road, through a little gate at their front yard, up the walkway, and up the steps of the porch. The blinking stopped as soon as she crossed the threshold of their gate with only the porch light remaining on. I watched as my mother tried desperately to open the wrought iron screen door. I could see her struggling with the doorknobs and alternating between fiddling with the key, yanking at the door, and banging on it. She was standing with her legs apart to brace herself as she yanked and pulled on the door. This is when something at the bottom step of the porch caught my eye. A black shadow on all 4s climbed out of the bushes that grew on either side of the porch steps. I was terrified, as I knew their 3 dogs were very vicious to anyone besides the older couple. Something was off though. Most dogs run and attack. This didn't seem like any normal dog. It moved like fog, gliding stealthily up the steps toward the front door, as if to avoid making a sound. It had bigger shoulders than any dog that I'd seen in my life up to that point. I stood there, watching in horror, waiting to see my mom be attacked by this big black dog. She continued to bang and scream, and that's when it happened. The dog seemed to tiptoe slowly up to my mom and just disappear through her legs and into the door. Like it went right through wrought iron and the solid wood doors and was just gone. The lights flickered on and off again in the front rooms for a few seconds, and then suddenly the wrought iron door swung open and my mom fell back, nearly rolling backwards down the steps. She got up and went to work on getting the wood door open. It opened easier than first, and she disappeared inside, leaving the door open, and was gone for a good few minutes. In that time, the inner wood door moved back and forth, but not like wind was pushing it. It seemed very choppy, almost glitchy if you could imagine that. I could see lights flickering on and off inside of the house, and I thought I saw a dark figure with massive shoulders standing upright in the doorway when it had reopened all the way. I was staring so intently that when my mom emerged suddenly, carrying the granddaughter with Irene following right behind her, it startled me. They ran across the road, up the driveway, and I hurried over to unlock the door for them. The girls were crying when everyone stumbled into our house. My mom was trying to calm down the granddaughter and trying to get answers from Irene about what happened. My mom's face was white as a sheet and her eyes were big. Looking back now, I can register the amount of fear she felt. Irene was going on about how they were in the den at the back of the house watching a movie, and they heard something crash in the front door. There was a large area of wall that was opened up sort of like a window between the den and the kitchen, and then the same thing from the kitchen to the front room, creating a sort of openness from the front area through the house to the den. Irene said that when she stood up to look through the front door, she saw a large black figure with wide shoulders that looked more like a beast than a man standing in the front room. Huge, bigger than any man she had seen, and he didn't seem fully solid. The lamp that lit the front room, its light wasn't completely blocked out by the figure. She could kind of see through it. She screamed and grabbed the granddaughter and ran into the bathroom that was off to the side of the den. She locked the door thinking it was an intruder and tried calling my mom from the phone in that bathroom. The phone was also a toilet paper holder. The 80s were a strange time. She said that she couldn't get through at first, and all she could hear was a deep voice laughing on the line. When she finally got through, it was laughing so loudly that she didn't know if my mom could hear her shouting for help. This must have been when my mom heard the static. When my mom was trying to redial and there was no answer, it was because Irene heard banging on the bathroom door. This bathroom had another door that led into one of the bedrooms, and even though she was terrified, Irene led the little one into that room, locked the door to the bathroom, and ran across to lock the other door that led to the hallway. She grabbed the phone from the beside table and took it into the closet and stacked several suitcases in front of her and the little one, putting themselves as deep into the corner of that closet as possible. When my mom finally got through to them, as she was putting her shoes on to go over there, Irene was hysterically trying to relay her message of fear through gasp and mumbled phrases. My mom just told her that she was on the way and left. Irene said that the whole time they waited in that closet, she could hear snarls and growls and things breaking in other rooms. The dogs in the backyard were going wild, barking. She heard the door of the bedroom open and something huge slowly walking toward the closet. She said the footsteps sounded loud and heavy. Just then, the doorbell rang and she heard banging on the door. It was my mom, desperately trying to get in. She seemed to stop whatever was coming for them, but she was too terrified to move from the closet, so they waited until my mom got into the house. She said it seemed like forever, and my mom had gone into the house yelling for them and flicking lights on. When she got into the room they were in, they called to her and she dug them out of the closet and brought them back. My mom never saw anything while she was there. No man, no beast. I had been quiet the whole time just listening. I was searching for answers in her story, and when I couldn't find any, I began waiting for my turn to speak. My mom got up and went to get them some water and some tissues to wipe their tear-streaked faces. As they sat there sniffling, I decided it was my turn and I asked, "But what was that big dog? And why did it go through the door?" "What do you mean?" My mom replied. She had stopped walking midway back to the sofa where the girls were sitting. I was still standing in the middle of the room, and I pointed out of the window to their house. "When you were on the porch fighting with the door, I saw a huge black shadowy dog walk out of the bushes up to the porch steps and through your legs. It disappeared through the door. How did you not see it? It was right there." I was pointing more intently at the window in the direction of their house now. Once more, the blood rushed from my mom's face and she nearly dropped the cup of water. I don't know what you mean. The dogs were in the backyard and I heard them barking," she replied, sounding as if her throat was as dry as the desert we live in. By this point, I was practically jabbing my pointer finger towards the house with every other word. "It wasn't shaped like those dogs." Its shoulders were too big, and it moved like smoke. It went right through your legs. I became frustrated. The look on her face changed as she stared at me. Why was she avoiding it? What was it? I demanded vehemently. And how did it crawl straight through the door? She stood there frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know if she was afraid that I might be seeing things, or that she went into a dark house right after that thing. She finally blinked, a single tear rolling down that she quickly wiped away, and she handed the girl some tissues and a cup of water. She turned to me and looked at me in a way I'll never forget and simply said, "You saw nothing, you imagined it." And she continued consoling the girls. They called the bar that the older couple had gone dancing at and had them paged. When they called back, my mom explained what happened and they rushed home, police arriving soon after. The police searched the whole house and found no one there. No sign of forced entry, no person or people, no dark shadows. There were broken knickknacks and decorations throughout the house. A few picture frames knocked off the walls. In the end, they assumed it was somehow an intruder. They said my mom must have scared them when she came for the kids, and since she left the door wide open when they ran back to her house, the suspects most likely snuck away, and nothing was missing from the house. Since that day, I only mentioned to my mother one other time of seeing dark shadow people. She looked at me the same terrified way she had that night, and I never brought it up again. I hate that look. It made me feel wrong or bad. I started thinking about all the absurd, unexplained things I'd seen for as long as I can remember. My earliest memories started around 3 years old, and I can remember lots of things like eyes staring back at me from dark corners, faces seeming to melt momentarily, dark shadows during broad daylight, and things disappearing and reappearing in other rooms or days later, or things moving in my peripheral vision. But I never knew that other people didn't see this stuff too, until that day. I'm an adult now and still fear the dark. I almost always have that feeling that something is watching me, but now I hesitate to look back. I fear what I might see, and that scares me, knowing since I was 6 years old that I shouldn't have seen that stuff at all. That hasn't stopped me from having dozens of other terrifying experiences and still seeing things that my eyes can't explain.
I came from ancestors who were believed to have practiced witchcraft a very long time ago. These people, called Babolian, are believed to have had supernatural gifts imputed to them back in the day, including the ability to communicate with other entities from other realms. Mind you, this happened before religions were introduced here. However, these gifts, or some people call them a curse, were passed through generations, and although we're not much talked about nowadays, they can still be observed here and within our families. My siblings, of course, were the chosen ones. My earliest encounter with the supernatural could be traced back to when I was living with my grandparents. Since we lived in such a low socioeconomic state, my parents had to burn the midnight oil grinding stones just to provide for us. We then had to be taken care of by our grandparents, who built a small hut on their farm to live at. During this one night, I remembered the moon was full, and all of us had put ourselves into slumberland, when I was awoken by a loud howling just outside the hut. So I decided to peek through a small slit between the walls. To my surprise, my gaze struck upon a fair, glowing white wolf howling at the beautiful full moon. It was relatively bigger than a normal wolf, with crimson eyes, and its fur was mesmerizing. It appeared to be glowing, or at least it was reflecting in the moon's illumination, so gracefully. That's when my grandparents woke up and told me to go to sleep. Later, when I asked them what it was, they told me it was the spirit of the jungle. I was very lucky to be able to have seen it. Fast forward to where I am now. My ability to sense and see things other people can't have long been addressed to me. It's already so normal for me to stay in a cemetery alone at night during our All Souls festival to have the place cleaned. My colleagues are well aware of this too. I remember during this one time when we were at school and the water supply system had broken. There was a small creek located at the hill's foot where we usually go for our bath. It was dusk, and we were only accompanied by the light from our torchlight. It was all normal until the day after, during recess time, where we all gathered at the canteen to talk about how we needed the water supply system fixed so we didn't have to take our bath at the creek again. My colleague was shocked when I asked this one question, if he saw a woman and her child who were at the creek with us last night. To his horror, the canteen lady, a local there, overheard our conversation and began telling us there was a pregnant woman who passed away a long time ago right at the river we usually go to. I wasn't amused by this because with a smile I simply replied to her, "Well, the child's all grown up now and seems happy with his mother." And I can see their creeped out look as I said those words. Last year when the pandemic hit, as hard news for our country, schools had to be closed for a while. Regardless of this, I had applied for an interview for a new position in my career journey at the beginning of the year. When schools were temporarily opened in August and September, the supervisors from the upper levels decided to conduct my interview at my school. It was Friday, and normally I would drive back with my other colleagues out the jungle to our hometown. But I was so tired from all the interviews and presentations that I chose to stay at the school instead, this time alone. So I have the whole school to inspect just for myself during that weekend. I remembered it was exactly midnight when I was watching television and my stomach suddenly growled for food. So I went to the kitchen and fried myself some chicken drumsticks, and that's when I heard someone knocking on the front door. I brushed it off, not knowing who or what it was. Even though the house was fully lit, I could feel this tremendous dark energy creeping up my surroundings. My vision is still fine, but my feeling was not. It was as if the world was entirely consumed in darkness, and nothing could ever be seen or felt. The feeling stayed for a few seconds, and mind you, it wasn't terrifying at all. I was not scared, just normal. When I woke up the next day, I was told by one of the villagers that someone had passed away the night before, during the exact same time I'd heard the knock at the door. And this, believe it or not, was not the first time I saw or felt someone announcing their death.
A few years ago, I was a young single mom living with my toddler son in an apartment complex at the edge of town. I was working a crappy full-time office job to pay the bills and get us back on our feet after divorcing my son's father. This is a small northeastern town where little to nothing ever happens, but when something does, it is big news. That is why everyone was abuzz when I walked into work one day and I asked what was going on. My coworkers informed me that someone had managed to escape from the psych ward at our local hospital and the authorities couldn't find him. I would have just shrugged this off, considering that does not really happen outside of a horror movie. But my coworkers showed me a news article with a photo of someone that looked very familiar. I recognized the guy that had escaped as he and I had gone to high school together several years prior. We were not friends, not even acquaintances really, but I remembered him as being an athletic, popular guy from a wealthy family with lots of friends. I skimmed through the article that explained that he had been involuntarily committed and had somehow managed to leave the hospital. He had been gone for a few hours before someone raised the alarm and the authorities were asking the public to keep an eye out but be careful, as they did not know of his mental state. I shared with my coworkers that I knew the guy and told them that I remembered him as being a normal, happy kid, but of course, things can change over the years. One of my coworkers piped up and said, "Hey, They think he was spotted heading toward Creek Road. Isn't that by your house?" This gave me pause. That was by my house, but honestly, did not really bother me much. Surely, he would have kept going to avoid detection. As I lived less than a mile from the hospital, I shrugged it off, went to work, and forgot about it for the next few days. I went into work and heard my co-workers discussing the escaped patient again. They caught me up on the story, letting me know evidence was found that he had broken into the house of someone he vaguely knew, slept in their attic for a day or two, then left. He was spotted leaving the property, but was long gone by the time the police arrived. I went to my desk and Googled his name, immediately pulling up several new articles. What really caught my attention was not that my coworkers had told the truth, which they had, but that the house he broke into was also right by my house, 2 streets away from my apartment complex. I mentioned this quietly to my coworkers, one of which replied, "Whoa, wouldn't it be weird if he broke into your apartment to hide?" He laughed and went back to work. I laughed too because that was absurd. He certainly would not remember me and would not know where I lived. But the thought did spook me just a little. Anything was possible, right? That night, I returned home with my son. We had dinner, I gave him a bath, and put him to bed, as was our regular routine. I was sitting on the couch in the living room, watching television, when I hear a thump. I assumed it was one of my neighbors shutting a door or something, so I ignored it and went back to my show. A few minutes later, I heard another thump. Now, the noise caught my attention. Being a paranoid young mom, I went immediately upstairs to check on my son. As I climbed the stairs to our second floor, my co-worker's comment popped into my head. "Could someone be in my apartment?" No, that's insane. I shook off the idea and went into my son's room to see him sleeping soundly in his crib. Seeing he was safe, I adjusted his blankets and headed back down to the couch. I was just being jumpy for no reason. I needed to stop watching so many scary movies. I sat back on the couch, turned my show back on, and tried to relax. It was then I saw a shadow pass over the living room. Our apartment has 2 floors, more like a townhouse, I suppose, with a kitchen, dining room, and a living room on the bottom floor, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor. The living room was at the back of the apartment and had a set of glass doors leading out a large grassy area that spanned the length of the complex and was sandwiched between the back of our building and the back of the building across from us. It served as a backyard to all the residents. Anyway, I had some long, sheer white curtains covering the glass because it freaked me out at night to have them uncovered. I turned my head and once again saw a dark shadow glide across the window, visible through the sheer curtains. The logical part of my brain said it was just someone walking their dog back there, but then remembered the entire complex had a no pets policy. This, coupled with the realization that I had literally never seen anyone walking out there in the year that I had lived there, made my heartbeat pick up a bit. I had my coworker's comment in the back of my head as I watched the shadow pass by the doors again, slowly, as if it were pacing. I was frozen in place, completely unprepared for this event, and thinking that if a deranged guy was able to escape a secure hospital unit, certainly it was possible for him to randomly choose to break into my apartment out of the 20 that were available in the complex. The shadow passed once again, then came to a stop outside the door. I stopped breathing, gripping the blanket on my lap with white knuckles. Just as I was thinking I had officially lost it and had to be hallucinating this event, the door handle rattled. At that moment, my son began to cry upstairs. The rattling immediately stopped and the shadow disappeared. I walked over and pulled the curtains apart, looked from side to side across the expanse of dark grass. Nothing. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding, pulled the curtain shut, and hurried up the stairs to attend to my son. I have no idea who was outside my apartment that night. I don't know if it was the guy who had escaped the hospital or some other run-of-the-mill psycho. But I could not get my coworker's comment out of my head. I put an extra lock on the glass doors, got opaque curtains, and after a while, I was comfortable sitting in my living room at night again. I no longer live in that apartment or even in that town, nor do I have that office job anymore. But as for the guy who managed to sneak out of the hospital, he was eventually apprehended in a town 2 hours from here and was readmitted to the hospital under 24/7 supervision. And I have no idea where he is now. Hello everyone, it's Miss Creepy Tales here. Thank you so much for listening to the video, we really appreciate it. I also hope that you enjoyed my voice as much as my creepy siblings on my channel do. Since you're here, I'm sure you're a fan of creepy or scary horror stories, and you will definitely find those type of content on my channel too, with a mix of no-sleep stories, creepypastas, and also true crime stories. I would also like to thank Mortis Media for being an amazing person and narrator and being so kind to have me on his channel. I really hope to see you on my channel. Again, thank you so much for listening to the video, and stay scared, 'cause your fear feeds me.